Ahoy there. Today on the Red Sea, what is something you did as a kid that heavily impacted your parents, but you did not know until later in life? Mine isn't not really moving or inspirational or anything, but when I was younger, my parents asked me if I wanted to have a sibling, and I told them no because I was just thinking in terms of being a spoiled only child since I was young. I later realized that my mom had extreme difficulty getting pregnant with me in the first place and had always felt pressured to the point of depression to have another child because she thought that I would grow up being lonely without a sibling. She's a twin who has always been best friends with her sister. By me saying that I did not want to have a sibling, it lifted a huge weight off her shoulders and she came out of depression eventually. For my dad's 40th birthday, we decided to drive to Disney World from PA, a 17-hour drive. Has a big deadhead. My older brother, 13, and I, 9, decided to use my brother's computer to make him a mix, but in a very sneaky way. We make a fake creative writing prompt for my English class as a way to ask him what his favorite playlist would be. He was none the wiser. On the third CD of the mix, we slipped a song in of us singing him happy birthday. I did not know at the time, but apparently it was a night shift. That song came on. The combination of all his favorite songs on this thoughtful mix and his son singing him happy birthday was overwhelming. He pulled over, woke my mom up, and they cried together from happiness. I never knew about it until a few years ago. When I was 9, I told my mom that she would die of cancer and leave me an orphan if she did not stop smoking. And she stopped smoking up until 2 years ago. What did you do 2 years ago? She was dating a kid my age who smoked. He cheated on her, and somehow that was her revenge. Yeah. I do not know either. Dating a kid your age. That's kinda creepy. Yeah. I thought so too. I tried to give him a chance because my mom seemed to think he was special, but he was a super d-bag. At one point he told me I could call him dad if I wanted to. That was the awkwardest moment of my life. My mom used to travel a lot for her job when I was a little kid. So much so that when I once drew a family picture, she was not in it. She stopped traveling as much, even though it paid her more, and got a job that was paid less but kept her at home most of the time. I only found out about this a couple months ago. It made me feel awful. My dad traveled overseas for a month or more at a time for work. When she was very small, my sister told my mom, "I do not remember what daddy looks like. He dropped everything and came home." When I was 10, I said to my mom, "Why are you married to dad? He's not even nice to you." She filed for divorce like a week later. When I got older she brought up the story, and it kind of freaked me out. Obviously their marriage sucked ass before that, but it was weird to find out that something a 10-year-old said made such a huge impact. I was 21 when I pointed out to my mom that my malarkey relationship at the time was just like hers with my dad. I made the money and my ex lived off me. I did not put it like that. Apparently that was what made her realize what kind of example she was setting for me and my brother by staying with our dad for the kids. I tell people on the relationship subreddits all the time, do not stay for the kids. You're not doing them any favors. Not me, but my grandpa was reading the letters his parents sent to each other while his father, my great-grandfather, was away in the Navy in WWII. He found a letter from his mother that said, "Was going to ask you to come home on hardship leave." They owned an important store in town, and it would have been a legit request. But young Grandpa Nomable was bragging to his friends today about how his daddy would never chicken out and use hardship leave. And I just cold not do it. He broke down and cried. My grandpa was only 5 years old at the time and did not really know what he was saying. My great grandpa lived, luckily, but that was years of war he might not have gone through. I broke my arm very badly when I was 6. It was so messed up that they almost amputated. We had just moved from CA to WA and did not have health insurance. My grandfather put up his home as collateral for me to have a, at the time, very innovative reconstructive surgery. I now have a plastic joint, pins, and donor tissue. It's a small miracle that my arm works at all. Here's what I did not know / remember. Only mom and I had moved. I remember dad had to stay behind for work. At the time he was a pretty popular recording artist. But that's just what they had told me. They were actually separated. Dad did not want to quit music / drugs. Mom wanted a cleaner, simpler life. When he got word that I had surgery he drove straight through to get to WA. While here, he decided to stay and get a real job with health insurance. To sum it up, my broken arm led to my parents' reconciliation, the end of my father's music career, and eventually the end of his speed addiction. When I was in the primary school in Croatia, there was this optional flat fee you could pay and the kids would be served lunch. Not like shop style lunch in US. Obviously, if you were not happy with the food they provided, or for whatever other reason you could choose to not pay it and give your kids sandwiches or whatever. But nearly everyone paid it, and so did my parents. 1 month. In the 3rd year I had forgotten to tell my parents when the payment is due. I told them something like 3 days before it was due, and due to a terrible financial condition we were in, my dad forgot to account for the lunch fee. Times were difficult after the Yugoslav wars and my parents were struggling, but they always took great care for me not to feel any of it. But this time, my dad could not find money from anywhere. He even asked to borrow money. Keep in mind that this was a relative low fee, something like $15. No luck. I simply went back to the teacher and told her that I was not gonna go to lunch this month. No big deal. I get 10 more minutes to play soccer or whatever. Did not bother me, but it hit him immensely. This was the first time that he had to concede that he could not provide food for his children. First time when he needed to pay to feed his child and he simply could not. Same day he started researching his options. He got a second job. Spent days on the computer and phone. Every minute of free time he had. About 3 months later, I had restarted getting the lunch following month. He and my mum called me and my brothers in for a family meeting and asked about how we would feel if we were to move to Australia or Canada. I did not really care. Seemed cool at the time. We said yes. So they initiated the immigration process, pulled some strings, and within a year we were packing our whole life into 5 suitcases and moving to Australia, where we knew about 3 people and had no family and knew nobody and nothing. Years later, my father admitted that the inability to pay my lunch fee was the straw that broke the camel's back, and whenever they ask him why he moved to Australia he says that he could not feed his children in Croatia, even though I never really went hungry. To sum it up, I forgot to tell my dad about the school lunch fee. His response was to move our whole family to the other side of the world. This is more of a vice versa. Last week, I received an email from my daughter's teacher. They were doing a project on who is the most inspiring person to them. Most of the kids put cartoons, superheroes, movie stars, singers and the like. And so the teacher was able to have the kids print those pictures off the net. It turns out my daughter listed me. So would I be so kind as to reply with a picture of myself? I was a blubbering mess for a good half hour. I do not do drugs or have sex in front of her. But am not exactly father of the year either. I'm now much more aware of how I act around my daughter now that I realize how much kids pay attention to the things their parents do. Anyway, when she was born I set up a Hotmail account for her and I email the account once a week as sort of like a journal, telling her about the things she's done or I have done and what happened that week. I plan on giving her the password to the email address when she graduates high school, and I'm sure this email her teacher sent is one of those moments where she will realize the impact she's had on me. When my dad took me to Disney World he was still a smoker. One day after a fairly long day of rides and such I wanted to go on one more ride. He said okay, but first let me have a cigarette. I said nah, it's okay. We can head out then. He quit smoking then and there. Cold turkey. Edit. I was about 5 at the time. Apparently I guilted my dad into sobriety, though I have no memory of it. Early Saturday morning, after cartoons, I tugged on his sleeve while he was sleeping off a hangover, and he rolled over and yelled "Bleag, leave me alone." So I screamed and ran away. He said the look of terror on my face convinced him to stop drinking. Reminds me of my dad's story. My older brother is mentally disabled, and my dad ran away from home on an alcohol/coke binge when my brother was 4. He refused to speak to my dad on the phone when he called to let them know he was on his way to Texas, where his brother lived. This was my dad's wake-up call. His son was mentally disabled, but knew that the fact that daddy was gone hurt him. When I was about 4 or 5, my father would be working in Washington D.C. from Monday to Thursday, while we lived in New York. One day I told my mother that it was like I only had a dad on his weekends. This shook him so much that he changed jobs within 2 weeks of him hearing this. And now he is home around 8:00 p.m. every day. This one is kind of odd. But when my parents divorced, when I was just 6 years old, my mother kept the house we lived in, and my father built a new house next door. All because of me. He did not want to be an every other weekend dad, even though he paid child support that way. I grew up in a small town and the 2 houses were probably 200 to 300 yards apart, with just some woods separating them. I had a bedroom at each house and would alternate houses each night. It created a weird dynamic, but could see either parent whenever I wanted. walking back and forth between houses day after day had worn out a pathway in the woods between the two houses. When I turned 18 and moved away, my mother also finally sold the house a couple years later and moved. Just recently I visited my father in my hometown and walked to the edge of the woods. There's no trace of that well-worn path anymore, but I can still see it in my imagination. This tore me up when I found out about it. My sister was 16 when I was 8, and at the time she and my dad did not get along at all. They would fight a lot, and my sister would spend a lot of her time alone in her room. One night my sister and my father got into it pretty bad. After all the yelling stopped, I was sitting with my dad, and I asked him something along the lines of, "Are you going to stop loving me too when I become a teenager?" Apparently this deeply moved my dad, and he was determined to repair his relationship with his daughter. He went into her room that night to talk to her and began spending more time with her. They're still close to this day. Here's the real kicker. I was talking to my sister about her relationship with our dad, and she said that she was severely depressed when she was a teenager. Apparently she was planning on killing herself, but in the course of the conversations she had with my dad, she revealed this to him. He got her into treatment. According to her, my dad saved her life. Even to this day I wonder if my innocent comment to my dad saved me from having to bury my sister. I did not have a happy childhood until I met my father. When I was very young, my mother introduced men into my life by telling me, in private, that this is your dad. Be nice so that he'll stay. Whenever the men left, which was usual after a month or two, and another came into the picture, she would instantly tell me I was wrong. He was not your real dad, but this one is. This happened a handful of times, and each time I was heartbroken. I did not know why, because I was not even 6 years old at the time when this was going on in our lives. I just felt like every single person who was my dad kept leaving me. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, my mother dressed me very nicely and had a talk with me as we rode an elevator. She told me that the man we were seeing was definitely my birth father. So when I see him, I had to run up to him, hug him, and say, "Dad." She told me that if I did this, she would be very proud of me for being a good girl. Being young and frightened of my mother, I spent a good portion of time trying to please her. So, when we walked into the office, I saw this man standing there, looking fairly upset and angry. He frightened me, but I was more frightened of making my mother upset. I ran up to him, hugged him, and said, "Dad, I do not remember much." He sat me in front of his computer, asked me if I have ever played a computer game, and he set up Pong for me to play. When I said I did not, I remember them arguing, but he was so nice to me. Sooner or later, he ended up marrying my mother. She was not a nice person, very abusive. I remember one bad fight in particular. She was about to hit me and cut my hair because I fell asleep with gum in my hair. He stepped in front of her and took the hit and got cut in the process. Eventually, she stopped noticing me and he took all the physical abuse. Whenever he threatened to leave, my mother told me to beg him to stay. I did as she asked because I selfishly wanted him to stay. I did not want to be left alone with her, and in the short time he was in my life, I needed him. So, he stayed. On my 16th birthday, he told me he was not my birth father. I always knew that he was not my biological father, but I also wanted to believe that he was. It hurt very much when he told me. The illusion of having him as my birth father just shattered, and it hurt because I wanted a good parent. It hurt even more when he told me about my real birth father, who apparently is also not a nice man, serving time for killing a pregnant woman for a parking spot ... and had to be put in jail very quickly because of political ties, corrupt foreign country politics. At that moment, I felt like I was the devil's spawn, and I started living in fear that genetics would take hold of my senses and it'd end up just like my mother. I cried. He cried. He told me that blood meant nothing, and I was still his daughter. A few months later, I told him to leave my mother. I told him I would be okay, but that he had to leave. He had been speaking to a woman online for over a year and fell in love with her. We even met her under the guise of visiting college campuses, and I liked her. So, I told him to leave. I always felt guilty for asking him to stay, even if I was just a kid who did not know better. He left with my blessing. Just about 4 months after I turned 16. The last thing I remember was him hugging me and telling me that goodbye really meant "I'll see you later." That was the last time I saw him in person. I lived my messy teenage years, and I left my abusive home life to build my future. I followed all the advice my dad gave me through the years he was in my life. It's okay to have sex before you're married. Use college to find yourself. It's okay to try drugs, but be careful and do not let yourself get addicted. Do not be afraid to question authority. I did it on my own. All the while thinking about his life and hoping that he was happy. I spent all my years after he left trying to be the daughter he could be proud to have. All that time, I lived my life in a way to thank him for all that he had tried to do for me. To this day, I owe my strength to this man. About 6 years ago, I found him online. I sent him a few emails, and he never emailed me back. I had gotten engaged, and I was very sad because I did not have my dad walking me down the aisle. My family had vilified him for abandoning us, and to be fair, he did leave without a single word to my mother. I guess that's why I really tried to find him at that point in my life. It took about a year before he finally sent me a response. He was afraid that I hated him, and he was riddled with guilt for leaving. So, he did not want to contact me, but his wife, the woman for whom he left my family, told him to talk to me. So he found the courage to. We chit-chatted for a while, laughed over silly happy memories, and avoided the proverbial elephant in the room. Eventually, I thanked him for my life and he just He just kind of laughed at me. He told me that I was actually the person who saved him. He was a miserable person before he met me. His life, while fairly glamorous, was empty. He never wanted kids until he met me. The moment I wrapped my arms around him and called him dad, he loved me. He loved that I listened, that I cared, that I wanted to learn. He felt like he finally had a legacy, and he learnt what he had missed all those years. He hated that we had to suffer together, but he would have made that choice again and again because he felt like it was his purpose. He told me that I was the reason he stayed, and I never had to ask/beg him to stay. For the longest time, I thought I was the worst burden in his life. All I did was need him, and for him. That was all he wanted. If you are reading this, you made it until the end of the video. There is no more after this. Click the thumbs up button since you liked the video because you made it until the end. On screen there should be some more videos similar to this. So either go do something else or watch another video. That's it. I do not know why you are still here. What are you waiting for, a secret message or something? Okay. Are you ready? It is.